And we are recording. Hello, David. How are you?
Hi, Aaron. Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being on. You're the Crypto Godfather on Twitter. You're
Yeah, that's me.
you're the first person on my show that I haven't met in real life, actually. But you're in Taipei right now in Taiwan, and I definitely want to
Yes,
have
I'm
someone.
currently in Taipei.
Yeah,
It's glad we can still meet under these circumstances.
yeah, for sure. You're the first person on my show that I haven't met in real life. We don't know each other, but you responded to one of my tweets, and I definitely want to have someone from Taiwan, or you're in Taiwan at the moment. Definitely want to have someone from Taiwan because I've been hearing Taiwan been talked about as like the safest place on earth right now, and kind of the gold standard of how to deal with this kind of situation. So I'm very interesting to hear this perspective from someone who's in Taiwan right now. Um, can you walk us through? I usually start these episodes with let's first get over the past couple of weeks. Like, what has been the story so far in Taiwan?
Let me first start by prefacing I'm in no way a medical expert. These are all just from my own. I've been following the coronavirus situation, sure. And also before I start, thank you for having me on. I responded because it's been quite a boring time in quarantine and lockdown, and it's good to I always like to connect with people across the world. So with Taiwan, I've been here for 8 weeks now. I came here originally in January 23rd, I think, to spend the Chinese New Year holiday here. Came over from Beijing to Taiwan, and originally I was planning to leave on February 5th. I remember started hearing more about the virus in early January. Taiwan, right now, more about Taiwan. It's we've got about 250 cases here, which is mostly from the last. Actually, about 100 more cases came in from the last week or so. Actually, mostly in the last few days because Taiwan's about to issue a countrywide lockdown on travel for only citizens of Taiwan can return to Taiwan. So after that announcement, a lot of people flew in from various places across the world, and it brought in a lot more cases. But each person coming in from overseas has to go through a 14-day quarantine. It's a mandatory quarantine. It's very serious. And but before these last few days, the situation was quite relaxed here. Seems very safe. People are going out and about in the town, in the city. They're still going out to bars and lounges, restaurants. Everyday life was very normal. There were some increased measures, as in anywhere you enter, whether it's restaurants or office building, you have to measure the temperature first, and also they'll usually have a hand sanitizer station there, where in every single public place, whether it's a mall or a restaurant, you have to check temperatures before going in. And also, everybody here is wearing a mask. I know it's not very prevalent in especially the United States, but it seems in Europe and Asia most people wear masks. But in Taiwan, it's I would say 99% of people here are wearing masks. People are well aware of the situation. The news, the media, every single channel is talking about it every single day. But in general, people are quite relaxed, except for the last few days where the cases increased a bit because of incoming travelers.
You mentioned you are in quarantine yourself right now. Is that correct, or?
No, I'm not in quarantine, but I'm quite a paranoid person when it comes to cleanliness. I'm more worried about contracting it onto my family. Prior to the last few days, before people started flying in, I was still going out, not as regularly as I usually would, but I would go out to meet with friends. I would go to an office here, just quite normal life. But since the last few days, because of the new incoming flights, I'm not certain if it's safe yet. So I'm trying to stay in these at least for the next few days until the situation is more clear.
What does quarantine look like right now? So you enter the country, you have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. What does that look like?
perfect you asked that because a family member of mine just returned from Canada to Taiwan. He's currently in day 3 of quarantine. So right now the procedure is you enter and then you have to get tested for the virus immediately. I believe it takes the results can come back within 24 hours, and then you enter quarantine by yourself with nobody else for 14 days. But this is slightly looser to what Beijing has started right now, where you quarantine in a hotel. But in Taiwan right now, it's still quite strict though. You stay at a designated place, and the government will hand you a special mobile phone, and this mobile phone will be they'll call you randomly. I believe it's once or twice a day. They'll call you, make sure you're home, and they track the mobile phone's location so that they know that you're not leaving the place. And each community will have their I guess it's comparable to like a community representative, or kind of like a smaller version of a mayor for each community, where they do the calls every day. They'll make sure people are staying in quarantine. And if you do leave quarantine or break quarantine at all within the 14 days, it's quite a severe fine. It's 100,000 NT, which is equivalent to about $3,000 just for leaving the door. I believe it's every hour you're out, you get fined that much. And then they have more severe fines where if you endanger the public, it's a million NT, which is about $30,000. Recently, I'll share with you a couple cases. There was a couple that came back from, I believe it was Spain or somewhere. They came back to Taiwan, and they went out to just to hang out outside, and they were fined $3,000 per hour. And then another young man, he went to a nightclub here right after returning from Cambodia. Left his device, his phone device at home, and he was fined a million NT, which is $30,000. So it's quite serious.
Yeah, for sure. That's quite a lot indeed. I've also heard about Taiwan. There's this issue with the World Health Organization, because Taiwan is not a member or not part of it because of the China relations. And I think what I read is Taiwan tried to warn the World Health Organization about human-to-human spread, and they were ignored because of these relations. Do you know anything about this?
I do understand this overall situation. The details of whether they warned the WHO or not, I'm not sure. But with that situation, it's basically that's basically politics at play. I won't dive too much into politics, but it's similar to whether Taiwan is recognized as a Olympic country or not. Very similar to whether they're recognized as a country in the WHO's eyes. Of course, with WHO having such strong support from China, it's tough to be considered its own independent country.
Right. You mentioned this GPS tracking. How do people from Taiwan feel about this? Is this something they're on board with, or is this something the government is imposing against the people's will? Or because I can imagine, I mean, in some countries it's very controversial, like in Israel right now or in Italy, they're starting to do this kind of stuff, and it's quite controversial. How do people in Taiwan feel about it or deal with it?
I feel people here are completely on board with it. I've never heard any complaints about it. In fact, I would say seems like there's full support from the community. Taiwan, just to add on a bit from what you mentioned about the WHO, Taiwan's practices, I'm glad to hear that from other media outlets had people say Taiwan's doing a good job. I've been keeping an eye on the media a lot, and the Taiwanese media is always praising itself on its capabilities with handling the virus. So it's interesting to hear that people outside are saying that too. It's hard to tell sometimes, but Taiwan's got quite a good infrastructure for the handling of virus outbreaks, especially from previous experience in 2003 with SARS. And another factor with Taiwan is that China last year canceled all visas and banned tourist travel to Taiwan. So I think that's had a significant impact on the spread of the virus, especially in the very beginning, especially during the Chinese New Year period where there's a lot of travel. So it limited the spread here a lot, and Taiwan acted quickly by banning travelers from China coming in. This was back in January. Um, Including my partner who was supposed to come here. She was couldn't come anymore because the trip was canceled. Um, Back to your question about how the Taiwanese community feels about it. It seems like people are very on board, and people condemn or vilify people who do break the quarantine. It's immediately reported in the news whenever somebody does, and people here really don't like when people do that. So I think there's full support for this.
Yeah, I had Leo Weise from Hong Kong on the show the other day, and he also mentioned the previous SARS outbreak and how that really kind of made a cultural impact. So you would say something similar happened in Taiwan, where the previous outbreak really made it clear to people that they need to act if something like this happens. That is a good summary, right?
Oh, most definitely. Um, I remember when it was everything changed very quickly. The first day I arrived here in January, you could still go to 7-Elevens or convenience stores and find multiple. You could buy masks, and then within 2 or 3 days is when the pandemic started getting more serious globally. So there were shortages, and now the system is the government will issue. I think it's 3 masks per ID every week. So that's how the masks work right now. Just talking about supplies, toilet paper recently became on short supply here too, which surprised me too. This happened after the new incoming flights.
I saw the Taiwanese prime minister. I think he was encouraging people to hoard or to panic buy, or however you want to call it, because so he was kind of taking the opposite approach from my prime minister, for example, and I think a lot of governments where they're telling people not to panic buy. The Taiwanese government was telling people like, yeah, buy as much as you can. That's great for the economy. Go for it, which I thought was a very interesting game theoretic sort of way of approaching it.
I didn't really notice that, but I did. The media has been talking a lot about how people have been hoarding supplies now. This has only really started in the last 2 or 3 days. Before that, there was no hoarding at all. I recently went out to the store to look for toilet paper for a family here, and they were limiting now to 1 bag per person, and it was still sold out when I got there. So it seems like I think this should come down within a few days. So.
Yeah. Do you think a cultural change, like wearing masks and all the social distancing and all of that, could that happen in the West, you think? And what would it
I
take?
think this I think this event will be the catalyst that starts this kind of change in culture. Um, Even for myself, I've changed my habits a lot, improved my hygiene habits a lot too, especially with keeping hands clean. I'm very used to wearing a mask all the time now. I know. The CDC has still said that wearing a mask may not be effective. It's probably better to only wear a mask if you're sick or showing symptoms. But that's definitely not the case in Asia. It's never been, and wearing a mask is quite common here. Even before the coronavirus, I would wear a mask whenever the pollution gets bad in Beijing. It's really quite very normal here. So, but I do think that this might change the culture of the how everywhere reacts to viruses, how people conduct their daily lives. Especially with the speed that information spreads out today. I think it's driven a lot of the panic towards this virus too. But I also think that it'll change people's habits eventually.
Yeah. You mentioned the government does GPS tracking for people in quarantine, and there are big fines, but there's no lockdowns or anything like that, right? So how light or how heavy is the government touch in Taiwan? Is that basically it? What you mentioned before?
In terms of lockdown, like the U.S. or other countries affecting businesses, it's so far there's no other lockdown in terms of businesses or daily life. Not that I've noticed, not that I can recall right now. So far it's really just a quarantine, and people. Oh, there also have been limits to the large gatherings. So the government has only suggested against gatherings of too many people. It was either 50 or 500 people. I can't remember, but yeah, they've recommended people not to host events too large.
Okay, but that's not even a ban; it's a suggestion.
Yeah, it's quite light because in reality each case has been tracked here very, very closely, and I do generally believe it's quite safe compared to a lot of places. Every day since the beginning of the outbreak, each case could be tracked to where they were infected from, who they came in contact with, which places they'd gone to in the period of those days. So it was quite clear. They would name each case by number, like a case 37, case 38. So the containment has been quite good here. So I think the government has also been as giving people as much freedom as possible in this time. But who knows? I hope it doesn't change anytime soon, but it could if the situation gets worse.
Yeah, you did mention there's a lot of new cases in the last couple of days, or at least 100, and most of them are imported. Did I understand that correctly?
I believe almost all of them are imported. There hasn't been any. There's been very little what they call a community spread here, where it's where you don't know where it came from. It's so far each case has been tracked, and they've all come from overseas so far. People returning back to Taiwan.
Yeah. So, what do you expect will be what will the next couple of weeks look like, if you had to speculate?
Mm. Well, I've been in the same situation for 8 weeks so far, and not much has changed at all throughout these 8 weeks. It's been relatively the same. Life has been the same. There's been very few new rules made. But I do think if the only thing that would change that is if the virus starts spreading to more, if the number of infected cases grow, and if there is more evidence of community spread where it's not contained anymore, then it's very likely that we could go into a lockdown state where only essential businesses are staying open. Right now, it's there's already been discussion for possible lockdown, but it doesn't seem like at least for the next week or two. I don't know, but with the difficult thing with the virus is it's hard to predict because one case can easily turn into hundreds within a couple of weeks time.
Right. What do you think all this means for Bitcoin?
Bitcoin. That's what I've been watching. The other thing I've been watching every day. So Bitcoin. I knew the virus was already, the pandemic was already hitting the population back in early January, and this was before the global media really started picking up on it. So that's when I started. But even myself then, I didn't predict how serious it was going to be. So I hadn't starting from there, I had no idea the effect it would have on Bitcoin. But the day that the U.S., I believe Trump announced closures to borders closures for flights to and from Europe, that's when Bitcoin had that big crash, and then the stock market crashed with it. So I think it's been an interesting time. It's really interesting. It was bad that it crashed, but it was a great time to look at the Bitcoin markets and look at this event in time as evidence of where we're going to be in the future. So some people recently have been starting to talk about decoupling from Bitcoin, decoupling from the stock markets, from the traditional financial markets. But there's been very little evidence of that up until a couple of days ago, where there was a little bit of inverse correlation. But other than that, there's been no real evidence. So I'm not going to say it's going to be going up anytime soon to the degree that people hope for. But I do strongly think there's a small chance that with what's going on in the U.S., what's going on globally, I do think there's going to be a recession for the next half a year at least. especially with the U.S. now printing money and injecting money into the economy, trying to fix the situation. $6 trillion, $6 trillion entering the economy. Something like this might just be the catalyst that Bitcoin needs if people start gravitating towards investing in Bitcoin. But I do think right now it's still too small compared to any other financial market. People right now are just starting to worry. They're just starting to panic. They're worried about their paychecks. They're worried about their families. They're worried about their health. And I think investing in Bitcoin is far from the priority in their minds right now. But seeing what's happened in Asia, it's been about 2 months since the beginning of the outbreak, almost 3 months already, and people have relatively calmed down in most of China, Taiwan, Korea, even Japan. It's quite people's mentality have calmed down. And I think with the world markets so uncertain right now, and so at such a low point, after people relax a little bit, it could be a time for people to start looking at the investments again, where to park their money, whether it's in gold, Bitcoin, stocks again, going for the buying low stocks. But I think Bitcoin could be one of those options. I hope it is, because if we get another situation like in 2013 in Cyprus, when the banks shut down and people couldn't get their money out, that was a catalyst that sent Bitcoin very, I believe, it was 100%. But then the market was very small back then. Today, Bitcoin's a lot more well known. Information spreads a lot faster. Maybe Bitcoin's the channel that people look to. I think there's a small chance, not a large chance.
All right, David, Mr. Crypto Godfather, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
And
stay safe over there. And
yeah, you too. Easy for you. Cheers.
Take care.